When you picture a Viking, what do you see? Ice, wind-swept fjords, dragon-headed longships crashing through grey seas. You see horned helmets, which they never wore, and bearded men with axes raiding monasteries in England and France. It is a world of cold iron and blood. Now picture the Islamic Golden Age. What do you see? The glittering million-person metropolis of Baghdad, the center of the known world. You see vast deserts, camel caravans, and palaces of intricate tile. You see astronomers in the House of Wisdom mapping the stars, mathematicians inventing algebra, and caliphs draped in silk, a world of heat knowledge and gold. These two worlds seem separated by an impassable gulf, a gulf of geography, of faith, of culture. They belong to different stories, different histories, and yet, in the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists digging in the frozen soil of Scandinavia, particularly on the Swedish island of Gotland, began finding something that made no sense. They found coins, thousands of them, tens of thousands. In fact, over 100,000 silver coins not bearing the image of a European king, but stamped with Arabic script, Kufic calligraphy, praising Allah and naming the Caliphs of Baghdad and Samarkand. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a handful of trinkets. This was evidence of a vast, forgotten highway, a connection so deep that it would challenge everything we thought we knew about the Dark Ages. This is the untold story of the Vikings and the Caliphate, a story that reveals they weren't just distant images. They were traders, they were mercenaries, and sometimes they were brutal enemies. This is the story of when the Norsemen met the Muslim world. To understand this connection, we must first understand the two worlds as they were in the 9th century. In the West, the empire of Charlemagne had fractured. Europe was a patchwork of warring kingdoms, easy prey for raiders. But in the East, two new superpowers were rising, expanding with explosive energy. In the North, there were the people we call Vikings. We remember them as raiders, but that was only one part of their identity. They were perhaps more than anything the greatest explorers and traders of their age. From their Scandinavian homeland, they didn't just sail west. They sailed south to the Black Sea, and they sailed east using the great rivers of Russia as highways. They were tough, pragmatic, and obsessed with one commodity above all others: silver. In the south, there was the Abbasid Caliphate. In 750 AD, the Abbasid dynasty had seized control of the Islamic Empire, and in 762 they founded a new capital, Madinat al-Salam, the city of peace, known to us as Baghdad. Under caliphs like Harun al-Rashid, famous from the 1001 Nights, Baghdad became the largest, richest, and most advanced city on earth. Its libraries, known as the House of Wisdom, were filled with scholars translating the works of Plato and Aristotle. Its doctors were pioneering surgery. Its astronomers were measuring the circumference of the earth. This golden age was fueled by vast wealth from trade routes stretching from China to Africa. The Caliphate craved the goods of the cold north, thick furs to warm their palaces, strong amber honey wax, and darkest of all slaves. And in return, they had something the Vikings wanted more than gold itself: a seemingly endless supply of high-purity silver minted into coins called dirhams. The stage was set. The north had the goods and the transport. The south had the silver. All they needed was a road. The Vikings didn't need to cross the Mediterranean or the dangerous mountains of Anatolia. They had their longships, vessels of genius design, capable of sailing open oceans and crucially navigating shallow rivers. They found two main highways to the rich south. The first was the Dnieper River, which led down to the Black Sea and the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, or as the Vikings called it, Miklagard, the Great City. But there was another more dangerous and perhaps more lucrative route, the Volga. This mighty river flowed south, thousands of kilometers deep into the heart of modern-day Russia, emptying into the Caspian Sea. This was the highway to the heart of the Caliphate, to Baghdad. The journey was an epic in itself. A Viking trader, whom the Arabs would come to call the Rus, would sail from Sweden, cross the Baltic, and enter the Gulf of Finland. He would sail up the Neva River into Lake Ladoga, and then the hard part began. To get to the Volga, they had to engage in portage, dragging their heavy ships overland on rollers for miles through dense forests to reach the next waterway. They passed through the lands of the Finns, the Slavs, and the powerful Khazars, a Turkic kingdom that had converted to Judaism and controlled the vital gateway to the Caspian Sea, demanding a 10% tax on all goods. After the Khazars, they met the Volga Bulgars before finally sailing into the Caspian Sea itself, landing on the southern shores, where their goods would be loaded onto camel caravans and sent south to Baghdad. The Vikings called this vast, wealthy, and exotic southern land Serkland, the land of the Saracens. And it is from Serkland that we get our most astonishing, detailed, and striking description of what these Vikings were actually like. In the year 921 AD, the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad dispatched an embassy to the king of the Volga Bulgars. The king had recently converted to Islam and requested religious instruction and funds to build a fortress. One of the men sent on this mission was a diplomat, a religious scholar named Ahmad ibn Fadlan. Ibn Fadlan was a man of the high court of Baghdad. He was educated, sophisticated, pious, and perhaps a little self-important. And on the banks of the Volga River, he ran directly into a large trading party of the Rus, the Vikings. His official report, which lay forgotten for centuries until a manuscript was discovered in Iran, is the single most important eyewitness account of the Vikings in existence, and he was utterly astonished. He was first struck by their physical appearance. He wrote, quote, "I have never seen more perfect physical specimens. They are tall as date palms, blonde, with ruddy complexions. Each man has an axe, a sword, and a dagger, and keeps them by him at all times." But his admiration stopped there. He was taken aback by their hygiene, which he considered unusual. He wrote, quote, "They are the most unclean of God's creatures. They have no shame in urinating or defecating in public. They do not wash after intercourse." He describes a ritual that particularly appalled him. Every morning, a servant would bring a large bowl of water to the chieftain. He would wash his face, comb his hair in the water, blow his nose, and spit into it. Then he passed the same bowl to the next man, who did the same, and so on until the entire party had used the same unchanged water. To Ibn Fadlan, a man from a culture that prized ritual, cleanliness, and private baths, this was unimaginable. But the most famous and most intense part of his account was his description of a Rus chieftain's funeral. Ibn Fadlan was invited to observe it. He describes how the chieftain was placed in a temporary grave for 10 days while his funeral clothes were prepared. His wealth was divided into three: 1/3 for his family, 1/3 for the funeral, and 1/3 to buy beverages for the days of mourning. Then they asked which of his enslaved attendants would volunteer to accompany him into the afterlife. One young woman stepped forward. From that moment, she was guarded, dressed in fine silks, and treated as a queen, spending her last days drinking, singing, and performing ceremonial duties. When the day of the cremation arrived, the chieftain's longship was pulled onto shore. A funeral pyre was built. The chieftain, dressed in silk and fur, was placed on a couch on the ship's deck. They sacrificed his dogs, his horses, and his cattle, placing the pieces onto the ship. Then the enslaved girl was brought to the ship. She was given an intoxicating drink and led to the death tent by an old woman Ibn Fadlan called the Angel of Death. The girl was laid down next to her master. While two men choked her with a rope, the Angel of Death struck her with a dagger. Finally, the chieftain's closest male relative, naked, walked backwards toward the ship holding a torch and set the entire structure on fire. Ibn Fadlan watched transfixed as the ship, the man, the girl, and the offerings were consumed in a massive column of fire. A Rus warrior standing next to him said, quote, "You Arabs are fools. You take the one you love and cast him into the earth where he is eaten by insects and worms. We burn him in an instant so that he enters paradise at that very moment." This single account, raw, detailed, and unfiltered, shows the massive, almost alien cultural gulf between the two worlds. And yet this gulf was bridged not just by trade, but by something else. Vikings were very good at combat. The Rus who met Ibn Fadlan were traders, but in the lands of the Caliphate, these fierce northern warriors quickly found another more direct path to silver. They became mercenaries. Rulers in the Islamic world from Baghdad to Constantinople had a chronic problem with loyalty. Their own generals and bodyguards were often tangled in local politics, capable of staging a coup or removing a caliph to place their own cousin on the throne. The Vikings had the perfect solution. They were outsiders. They had no local family, no political ambitions, and no religious ties to any faction. Their loyalty was not to a god or a nation, but to their paymaster. They were the perfect apolitical elite bodyguards. We all know the story of the Varangian Guard in Constantinople, the elite Norsemen who served as the Byzantine emperor's personal protectors for centuries. But this practice extended far deeper into the Islamic world. Arab sources refer to Rus mercenaries serving in the armies of the Caliphs in Baghdad. Georgian sources describe them fighting alongside Arabs in the Caucasus. These Varangians became a valued commodity, known for their fearsome battle fury and their unwavering loyalty as long as the silver kept flowing. It's a strange and compelling image. 1,000 miles from the fjords, Viking warriors in mail and helmet standing guard at the silk-draped gates of the Caliph's palace in Baghdad, sweating in the desert heat, earning Arabic silver to be sent home and buried in Swedish soil. But the relationship wasn't always so professional. The Vikings were, after all, still Vikings, and where they saw wealth, they often saw an opportunity not just for trade, but for plunder. While the Rus Vikings were trading and serving on the Volga, their cousins in the west were sailing south past the Frankish coast and into a different part of the Islamic world, Al-Andalus Muslim-ruled Spain. In 844 AD, a fleet of as many as 100 Viking longships appeared off the coast of Lisbon, then part of the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba. They sacked the city before sailing south and pushing up the Guadalquivir River toward the capital of Al-Andalus, Seville. The people of Seville were like the monks of England, completely unprepared for this new enemy. The city was rich, prosperous, and believing itself safe deep inland, largely undefended. The Vikings fell upon it with a ferocity that shocked the Muslim world. They stormed the city, plundered its wealth, and burned its homes. The great mosque of Seville was damaged. For 7 days, the Norsemen raided the countryside, capturing and enslaving thousands. The Umayyad Emir Abd al-Rahman II was in a panic. His armies were in the north fighting Christians. He had to scramble to put together a force to stop them. He eventually assembled an army, and in a major battle outside the city managed to defeat the Viking force, displaying the captured raiders as a warning. He captured hundreds more, forcing them to convert to Islam and settle as farmers. But the emir was deeply shaken. He had been attacked from the sea by a terrifying red-haired enemy he never knew existed. In response, he did something revolutionary. He ordered the construction of a massive permanent navy. He built shipyards, fortified Seville, and established a maritime defense force that would, in later encounters, successfully repel new Viking raids. The raid of 844 AD proved that the relationship between the two worlds was not just one of distant trade. They had met as enemies in a clash of steel and fire that would reshape the military strategy of Muslim Spain. So what was the ultimate legacy of this forgotten connection? It's simple and profound. The Islamic world funded the Viking Age. We have a perception that the Viking Age was fueled by plunder from the West, gold from English monasteries, and silver from French churches. But the archaeological record tells a different story. The sheer volume of wealth that poured into Scandinavia from the east in the form of hundreds of thousands of silver dirhams dwarfed the loot from the west, especially in the early centuries. This silver wasn't just buried and hoarded. It was the engine of the Viking economy. It was the capital that allowed a chieftain to build a new longship. It was the money he used to pay the warriors who would join him on a raid to England. It was the wealth that funded the expeditions to colonize Iceland and Greenland and to sail to North America. The highway to the east was the economic pipeline that created the Viking explosion. When that pipeline began to dry up in the late 10th and 11th centuries, as the silver mines in the Caliphate were exhausted and the river routes became more dangerous, the Viking Age itself began to wane. For the Caliphate, the legacy was more complex. They had gained access to the prized goods of the north, the furs and captives that were symbols of elite status in Baghdad. They had hired some of the most formidable mercenaries on earth, but they had also awakened a new and unpredictable naval enemy that had forced them to adapt. The coins buried in Swedish soil are the physical proof. Each one is a silent witness to a journey, a transaction, or a battle. Each one a thread connecting the fjord to the desert. The history of the Dark Ages is not a history of isolated peoples huddled in fear. It is a history of profound, surprising, and complex connections. The Vikings and the Muslims of the Golden Age were not from different planets. They were from different ends of the same interconnected world. They met, they traded, they fought, they observed each other with a mixture of disgust, fascination, and respect. The story is not as simple as barbarians meeting civilization. It is the story of two dynamic, expanding, and driven cultures colliding on the great rivers of the world, drawn together by a mutual desire for profit and power. So the next time you picture a Viking, yes, picture the axe and the longship, but also picture him on the banks of the Volga, haggling with an Arab merchant. Picture him standing guard in Baghdad, earning a silver coin. And the next time you picture the Islamic Golden Age, picture the glittering mosques, but also picture the Emir of Cordoba frantically building a navy to fight a red-haired menace from the sea. Because the silver coin a Viking warrior used to buy a farm in Iceland may very well have been minted in Samarkand, passed through the hands of a diplomat like Ibn Fadlan, and earned by a brother who took part in the raid on Seville. Our world was never as simple as we imagine.